All right, I'll get started. I think I got everything set up. So if you're watching on Facebook or on TikTok or um, anywhere other than Zoom or the business page, it's going to be hard for me to see your comments just because I got a lot of things going on here and I'm just really watching those. So the best way to have your question answered is to go to the Zoom link. If you're on TikTok, you can go to the Facebook page. It says facebook.com/snake removal. And find the Zoom link there and then post it. So my name is Brian Hughes. I own Rattlesnake Solutions. Keep this part short, but basically I get to answer your questions about snakes because I'm around rattlesnakes all the time. Today I took it a little easy, but most of the time there's rattlesnakes in my life from the start to end of every day in some capacity, whether it be a wild snake or captive one or someone's house or doing things like this where we're reading about and talking about rattlesnakes. So that's why I might be able to talk to you in a little bit of a different sense than your uncle that sees a snake a couple times a year when he's hunting and, shoots it or has some crazy story about it chasing him or something like that. So if I don't know something, I'll say I don't know. And if there's something that I say that's wrong, feel free to correct me. But everything that I do say, if I don't say something that qualifies it as, well, I'm not sure or something, there is a publication or some kind of verifiable research that backs up what I say, or is based on our experience of removing snakes from homes or being around them. And just to put a little bit of light on that, so you know how much we're working with, it's thousands a year at this point. We have over 11,000 animals that we've removed at homes, and our crew is the most experienced at doing this in the country, probably the world, and of that I've been doing it the longest. So we're around snakes a lot. So what I'm going to do, I have 2 hours scheduled to do this. After that, my throat starts getting a little scratchy, so I stop. But I'm going to bounce back and forth. I have a bunch of great questions that people have asked on a list here. I'm going to go down that. I'll grab one, and then I'll see if anyone's asked one on the live chat and just kind of go back and forth. And sometimes if there's something that's similar, I'll just answer it once and kind of reference it later. And this whole thing, I'll make sure that's available later. So, if you don't have 2 hours to sit here and stare at me talk about snakes, you can duck out and I'll just post it later. So first question is from Lee. He asks, have any studies been made concerning the relocations of snakes? How do they do? If they make it to find new den sites? Says he's relocated many snakes in the last 3 years, and they're all northern Pacifics. So this is a very long and complicated topic that is really kind of at the heart of what my primary interests are in mitigating snake conflict with people. And it's a complicated answer. Go figure, right? So there are a lot of people that will give you a flat answer that relocation is a death sentence, and those people are wrong. The reason for them saying that is because there are a few studies out there that show that snakes that are relocated without certain considerations do relatively poorly. More than half of them might die in those situations. However, there are other studies that are usually not referenced by those people where all of the snakes live, and in some cases those snakes live and gain weight. So there's a lot of complication to it. And what happens with a timber rattlesnake doesn't necessarily translate beyond a broad context of that you're dealing with a different snake that also has a rattle on its butt to a speckled rattlesnake or a western diamondback. Just like a western diamondback in Phoenix, it doesn't have to really worry about the freeze line or snow, where a timber rattlesnake in New York doesn't really need to worry about 115-degree estivation period for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. So it's complicated, but if a snake is relocated to a place that has the correct seasonal conditions for it, usually into deep cover, a lot of other things, and a good estimation of what its home range is, that snake should do just fine. All available evidence that considers those factors show that those snakes do very well. And in the other ones where they're just kind of taken out and thrown under the bush, or it's not even mentioned in those studies, the definition of success needs to be looked at too. So let's say that you take a snake out and you drive it out and just dump it under a bush somewhere, and half of them live. Um, the alternative to that is a shotgun or a shovel in most cases. So 50% starts looking pretty sweet when you're actually looking at what the scenario is, rather than in comparison to what snakes that never meet a person do. So yeah, to shortly answer your question, if it's done properly, it works just fine. If it's not done properly, then who knows? So that's, I'll talk more about that later. I'm sure it'll come up again. But good question. It's a good one to kick off with, because that kind of speaks to the heart of our business and what we're studying. So in the Q&A, Scott's asking, you might not want to answer this publicly, but do I need a permit? Okay, we'll answer it publicly. It's fine. For non-endangered species in my collection, and you assume if I click them, keep them because they can't be released, and I get to use them for education. He's asking about the snakes that we have in our display. So we have we have all of the rattlesnake species that are found in Arizona, and he's asking about what their origin is and if I need permits. So yes, I do have permits for the protected ones. If they're not protected, I don't need that. I also make sure I got a letter from Game and Fish just to make sure that for the non-protected ones, since I'm using them for education, in some cases commercial purposes. So I want to make sure that everything is good there. But yeah, there's a lot of different reasons that we have them too. Some of them, yes, they are snakes that couldn't be relocated. A good example of that would be our Mojave rattlesnake. He came from a neighborhood where Vistancia is now that was completely obliterated and bulldozed. There was no place to relocate him, that he wasn't going to cause other trouble for other people or likely survive. So we needed a Mojave at that same time, so he gets to hang out with us and work for a living. But there are other snakes that we did collect, and I know that kind of rubs some people the wrong way, but there's a lot of reasons for that. So an example of those would be our Arizona ridge-nosed rattlesnakes that we have. The reason we collected those is because if you go to the Phoenix Zoo, or if you go to any, almost any place in Arizona, well, except for a few different organizations, the Arizona Herpetological Association, the Phoenix Herp Sanctuary, a couple others, I'm sure, that have them, they don't exist, and they are a state reptile, and people just don't see them very often in captivity. So I was able to get a permit to try to fix that. So we went out and gave ourselves some very strict guidelines on that. It had to be a neonate, which is a newborn, and had to be collected on a road with heavy traffic, meaning that snake would have probably died if we didn't find it. So we're not taking anything that wouldn't have already been dead out of the environment, and that's going to be raised up so that they can breed, and we can give those to places like that. So a lot of different sources of them, and yes, we do need permits where applicable. Okay, so another one from the list. What is the most venomous rattlesnake in Arizona? So that is very difficult to tell how exactly that relates to people. The really only measure of that right now is there's a system called LD50, which measures more or less how effective venom is at killing mice, or how much venom is required to kill half the mice that it envenomates. If you look at that, I've seen results that say that a tiger rattlesnake, drop for drop, is the most venomous. I've also seen that list given where Mojave rattlesnakes from certain areas are the most venomous. Really, what I've seen though from people that know much more about venom and its effect on humans, what I've seen them say is that more or less the amount of venom, the venom yield potential, is going to override a lot of that. So yes, there are certain areas where a Mojave rattlesnake is an incredibly bad thing to be bitten by, right? But if you are bitten by a very large Western diamondback rattlesnake, that might have a worse long-term reaction for you, and could hurt a lot worse. So I would say that, what is most venomous versus what is most dangerous, and which thing you would want to be bitten by the least, those may all be separate things. Or a tiger rattlesnake, by a lot of lists, is the most venomous rattlesnake in the country. But how many people have been bitten by a tiger rattlesnake? So it's not that dangerous, right? So how dangerous is something that is incredibly toxic that doesn't bite people? Whereas maybe a Western diamondback isn't all that venomous, which it is. Western diamondback is a bad thing to be bitten by. But if they are everywhere and tend to be large and give you a lot of venom, And that is a bad bite. That is something that can be potentially dangerous. So yeah, we can talk about that all night, but hopefully that's sufficient. Let me see. Okay, another one from the Q&A. What is my biggest surprise after chipping a rattlesnake, whether it's the largest range or pregnancy or something like that? The biggest surprise that we've learned so far in our work in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, where we are tagging and surveying and seeing what rattlesnakes do, is that they don't really travel as much as we thought they would. More or less, they stay within the drainages that they live in. I expected that to be the case to some degree, but I didn't realize that it would be to, as is current, 100%. Always the case. They never leave them. So they go up and down a drainage. So a rattlesnake's range is not a circle, which makes it interesting because when you're looking at relocation, when people talk about, and make sure to take it a quarter mile away, a quarter mile in the wrong direction is outside its home range, where you might have 2 or 3 miles in a different direction and they're just fine. And really, I guess maybe the biggest surprise is that a lot of the places in the preserve where Western Diamondbacks have never been documented and are assumed to have not lived there, when we expand the survey out to incorporate relocation data or snakes that are found at neighborhoods, there are plenty of Diamondbacks in those places, but they never visit the mountain. They live exclusively in the backyards of homes at the base. So there are a lot of lessons there, but that one is kind of a shocker. And in some of those places where there's some new construction, Diamondbacks are now showing up in the park where they never did before. So there's a lot of cool stuff like that, and I can't wait to get into that once we kind of get done with our work for the year. Let's see if I can figure out. I can't get rid of questions with the rest. Okay. So Veronica is asking, I indicate there are 13 species of rattlesnake in Arizona. Are there any species that tend to be more docile than others? So two things there. Some places you'll see that there are 13 species. Some places you'll see that there are 15. Some places you'll see that there are 17. And sometimes you'll see different mixes of that. All those questions are correct and wrong depending on who you're talking to. It depends on how you feel about certain species definition, mitochondrial DNA, a lot of different things in there. Acceptance of certain key papers that might change that. So if you're the Arizona Game and Fish Department, you list 13 species. You're maybe a little bit more conservative with what you're accepting on there. And then there's other ones like in the Arizona Rattlesnakes of Arizona book that came out in 2017, which is an excellent book that lists, they call it all 17, where some of those subspecies are elevated. So that's why you might see different species in there. And we certainly, I'm not a geneticist. I don't have any real ground to stand on to where my opinion matters for much. So that's why even in our own literature that we are putting out, you see different answers for that. So if anyone's wondering that, that's why. But which tend to be more docile than others. So each rattlesnake species may have its own tendencies, and of those species, each one may have its individual own temperament. So a good example that kind of talks about both of these is our black-tailed rattlesnake that we use in our educational displays. Of the rattlesnakes that I have worked with in Arizona, which is all of them to some extent, blacktails seem to be probably the most easygoing, meaning that they are not very flighty. They're very easy to work with a hook. They'll rattle at you and stand their ground, but they don't, they move relatively slower and have more of a boa-like quality to how they operate. However, the one that we work with is probably the most difficult snake to work with in our collection currently, just because it's a grump. It doesn't like being handled. It gets stressed very easily. We have to routinely cover it with things and really manage its stress when it's at an education event and that kind of thing. So yes, different rattlesnakes can have that. So I'd say a blacktail is probably the easiest going. And you've probably heard about Mojave rattlesnakes, Mojave green, all that, how they're super aggressive and all that. They're really not. They're not aggressive at all, but they can sometimes show a higher willingness to or tendency to become defensive quickly. So I've had Mojave rattlesnakes and prairie rattlesnakes, interestingly, both kind of flat grassland species, rattle at me from further away or more readily, or once they rattle, act more erratically than other snakes. So I would say that's probably the more defensive ones, or banded rock rattlesnakes, which will rattle at you just for any old reason if you're walking by. So yeah, there's a lot to that, but those are what I'd say probably the case for those. So Pam's asking, how long after a rattlesnake gives birth do you release them all? So when we can, and we can't always do this, meaning not all of us are equipped on our team, not all of us are equipped to safely house a pile of rattlesnakes at our house until they're ready. So, we do have a separate building here that we work with, and we're going to be working on another one shortly, so we have more room. But after a rattlesnake gives birth, we collect all the babies with the mother. When they are in that state, baby rattlesnakes lose moisture much more quickly than adult rattlesnakes. They can desiccate quickly and die very quickly, especially at the early part of their breeding or their birthing season, which is in July. So we hang on to them until they all shed their skin, and which after that is the natural time that they would normally leave their mothers and go kind of strike out on their own to go figure things out. So we feel that is the appropriate time to release them altogether, because what they're going to be doing anyway, they're going to be leaving. So we take the snake and we are very careful with where we release them, so they have lots of deep cover and then they can kind of go out into the world. And interesting things too, this year I watched, there was one gravid pregnant tiger rattlesnake, and one of the things I really wanted to learn was what is that process like once they leave their mother? Do they all just split and never come back, or is it more complicated than that? And what I saw in that instance was certain rattlesnakes left right away and never came back, and some of them kind of hung out with mom a little longer. So I just like humans, it takes some of them longer to leave mom's house than others. So we shoot for the best on that. But yeah, usually when we can, it's about 10 days before they're ready. Okay, another one from the Q&A on Zoom. Have I ever been bitten by a snake? Non-venomous snakes, many times. Gopher snakes, coach whips, king snakes, stuff like that. I still try to avoid it. Interestingly and kind of annoyingly, there are a lot of people that will give me a lot of grief about that, because I will wear gloves and go out of my way to not be bitten by a harmless snake. And that's interesting to me, because if you're gardening, do you wear gloves so that you don't cut your hands on rose bushes? You know, if you're a mechanic, do you wear gloves so that you don't cut the hell out of your hands on metal when you're working with it? So when you're handling snakes every day, sometimes you have venom on your hands too. It's something you avoid, but sometimes it happens, and I don't want any cuts on my hand. So most of the time, my hands don't have any cuts on them. That's intentional. So yeah, I am bitten by things. I don't put as much care into non-venomous snakes as I do venomous ones to not be bitten, but I still try to avoid it. Venomous snakes, I've never been bitten by a significant venomous snake. I've never been bitten by a rattlesnake. And I try my best to keep it that way. There are people that say it's not a matter of if, but when. I do not think that's accurate. I think that you can do this a long time, and I think if everything goes right, I'm going to retire with all my fingers. One of the things that you might notice that I don't do is do a lot of showboaty stuff. You're not going to see me holding a rattlesnake without tools. You're not going to see me doing anything with snakes that has more to do with tension or a need to fulfill that, or seem interesting than not. And that's more or less what keeps me safe. And if you're on TikTok, there's lots of people on there too. Go on the Zoom link, and that's how I can see your questions. There's too many comments on there for me to keep track of. Okay, I'll get another one from the previous questions. Jason's asking, I've never been bitten by a snake, but how long does it take for the venom for a rattlesnake bite to take effect? It'll take effect immediately. So most people that are bitten by rattlesnakes report immediate pain at the bite site, followed by swelling and feeling nauseous, tingling, and it progresses for a while. But the natural follow-up to this question is, do you die immediately? And it's, for the most part, that is no. It's a matter of hours, not minutes, for most people. If you have an allergic reaction to it, or if you're somebody like an ultra marathon runner who for some reason seem to have a real hard time with venom, and for the most part, you have more time than you think. However, you should still try to get to a hospital very quickly. And also, I'm not a doctor, so anything that I say during the course of this that seems like medical advice in any way, please completely disregard it. Other than just for your own general knowledge and anything a doctor says, please do what they say and stay. But basically, if you're bitten by a rattlesnake, you tend to know it right away. And if you are bitten and you think that it's a dry bite, don't wait and see what happens. The only person that should confirm that you have a dry bite is a doctor when he says or she says you have not been envenomated. So that's it. Okay, so let me check Facebook and see if I got any on there. I think I do. Being asked, can we see videos of me catching snakes? Yes, our Facebook page is loaded with videos. Most of the time, there's not videos of us actually capturing them. The reason for that is I need my hands to catch snakes. So we're almost always there alone. So we don't really have an opportunity to hold a camera while I'm catching a snake. Lately, I've been attaching a camera to the tongs, so you can at least see that. On our TikTok page, we have a lot more of that kind of thing. So we're working on some things so we can get some more videos in that. But you're really not missing much for the most part. What I often tell people is that, especially homeowners that sometimes even see angry that how easy it looks to be. First, if we're catching a snake and it looks exciting, something has gone wrong. Okay. If it goes well, it's just very quick, very easy. And the other thing is, if you are not experienced in doing it, you're most likely going to have a very different experience of putting that snake into that bucket than somebody that's done it several thousand times. So yeah, if it looks easy, that means we're doing our job, and that's what you're paying us to do. Okay, another one from Christopher. A common myth I hear is that rattlesnakes chase you. Can you verify that? They don't. Rattlesnakes don't chase you. There are many things that you can do that can either make you perceive that or create that situation, right? So there is a reason why people that work with snakes professionally and see them all the time are never chased by snakes. And there are people that are, when you're scared of snakes, then you're chased by a lot of snakes. This gets me in trouble because there are certainly right now a number of people watching saying, but hold on, I was chased by a snake. You weren't there. Who are you to tell me what I experience and what I don't? If you've ever seen the presentation on mythology of rattlesnakes that I give, 5 years ago or so or more, it was mostly about snakes. I talked about rattlesnakes and what they do and their natural history and stuff. And I thought that was how to address things like that. And more I'm learning and this is what the bulk of that presentation is now. It's about the way that our minds work, the way that memories work, the way that perception and how fear can change that. And things like Dunning-Kruger, where you may not even kind of know what you're looking at enough to where you don't even know how to gauge what you're doing. A good example of how a lot of this works is if you're in a Facebook group, what happens whenever anybody posts a picture of a dog track on like a hiking group? People say, well, that's a mountain lion for sure. Is this a mountain lion? Well, if it's not a mountain lion, it must be a buck. It's a dog track, right? But it's always the most interesting thing. And our brains are not made to be accurate a lot of times. So you might have a perception where there is a very large rattlesnake that chased you. And I believe you absolutely that you have that experience, but it doesn't mean that that's actually what happened. And to shortcut this, which could be its own presentation, like I said, look into the state of eyewitness accounts in court as evidence and the progression of that and the reason why people that are conducting interrogations are not allowed to ask certain questions or set up certain things. It's because our brains are very bad at doing certain things, especially forming memories and perceiving things that scare us. So a lot of it just falls in there. And then there's things that happen too, right? So sometimes a rattlesnake is out in the open. It doesn't know how to escape you. It doesn't know what a human is. So sometimes it might go for the closest shade that it can find. That might be the shadow that you're casting. So that snake might try to escape you by going under you. It might be going to the nearest shaded spot that it knows, which might be the bush that's behind you. And you think a rattlesnake is chasing you and you take off out of there with that perception. But really all you need to do is step aside and let it go by. There's other ones too. Sidewinders are a good example of this, where people say sidewinders chase them. Sidewinders don't know what flashlights are. So if you're looking at a sidewinder with a flashlight and it takes off in your direction, imagine seeing the first light you've ever seen that isn't the moon or the sun and knowing what to do with that. They're going to flee into whatever they can't see. They're going to whatever shadow, and they're not going to see you. And I found that with a flashlight, you can steer a sidewinder and get it to crawl whichever way you want. So people might have that experience that a sidewinder chased them. I can recreate that very easily using a flashlight. And also you can have a rattlesnake that comes towards you slowly in a lot of different ways, but that's not a chase. That could be a progression of its defensive behavior. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it. Generally, no, rattlesnakes don't chase you. Yes, people do perceive things poorly. So I'll leave that one there because that can go a long time, and that's the one that people tend to not like me for when I talk about that. But that's how it is. Okay, in the chat, Sharon's asking, with cooler weather coming up, will the snakes start to go into hibernation? Yes. So right now, October is pretty busy for snakes moving around, starting to slow down for our hotline and activity in general. It's being delayed a little bit because of this extraordinarily hot season, hotter and drier than normal. But even though it's cooling down next week, I think we're probably going to see an uptick in that because snakes are putting off that behavior. It's called ingress. That's when they're moving towards their dens. So they have to eat a last time. Some of them are mating. There's also other social behaviors that happen at that time. And then they are traveling, of course, to where they're going to spend the winter. That all happens right now. And by the second week of November, most rattlesnakes, and that varies depending on location and elevation, species, and lots of things. But from our data set, 10 years of collecting data on this, thousands of records a year, largest collection of data in the world. It's not published yet, but a lot of that will be. It's by the second week of November, those rattlesnakes know, they are where they're going to be. Okay, so that's when things kind of drop off for us, where one day we might have 5 or 6 calls, and the next day we get 0, and we don't get any for a while. So that's normally when that happens. And yes, you see the terms hibernation and brumation floating around. It doesn't really matter which one you use. I used to say brumation all the time until I learned it doesn't matter, and it's really not all that accurate. So now I say hibernation because people know what it means. So yeah, hibernation. They're going to go hibernate. So in Zoom, Stephen is asking, do I allow people to join in our studies at the Phoenix Mountain Preserve? He's interested in snakes. So unfortunately, we can't. It's not just a permitting thing, which it is. We can't actually have anyone come along with us because we have a partnership going with the City of Phoenix and the Arizona Game and Fish Department for that project. But the animals that are in those places, they are very sensitive to disturbance, and we cannot risk showing very sensitive places to anybody. And it doesn't mean that we don't trust you or don't think you're a good person or whatever. The fact is that let's say that I cloned myself and I had a copy of myself that was doing exactly the same thing with the same exact set of ethics and considerations for their stress and all that stuff. I still wouldn't show that person, because just going in and looking at a snake too often in the wrong way can alter its behavior and skew what we're trying to study. So we have to pay a lot of attention to that. There's a lot of times that when we go to a spot and see snakes, we will intentionally not visit it for a certain number of times, or we'll go and check it, but from further away, just to make sure we're not stressing them out and altering their behavior. So, in the future, I have some ideas to where we might be able to put together some things so that we can take some people out to some locations outside of our main study areas to look at snakes in the wild. I think there's a tremendous amount of learning that can be done in that way, but at the moment we're just not able to do that. So hopefully everyone understands that that's the unfortunate state of things, the rattlesnakes are very sensitive to that kind of thing. So we just can't risk it. So we just don't. And it goes against our permit too. So, okay, let's see. Another one from Veronica asked earlier today. In some adventure programs, you see that there's a guy capturing a snake and holding it by the back of the head and suspending it, talking about it, and the snake doesn't even rattle. Do I approve of people doing that? And it can alter the snake's perception of humans. And why does a snake a lot of times not seem afraid? So 2 topics there. The first one is that, no, I don't agree with that at all. There are lots of tools and safe methods of working with rattlesnakes safely available. So to just use your hands or to pin it by the head, unless you are working in a professional setting where you are trying to collect venom or have some need to do that, there is no need to do that at all. I have never one time pinned a rattlesnake by the head. I work with rattlesnakes in captivity in the wild every single day of my life. I have no need to do it. So why would I do that? Why would I put my fingers at risk to do that? And, just because someone's on TV doesn't mean that that is worthwhile either. There are a lot of ways that you could do that without, introducing that drama or stressing the snake out. There is also a really stupid group, a new kind of trend of idiots that free handle rattlesnakes. They just pick them up and hold them for whatever reason. Something that is a really funny trend about that when people do that too, that I don't think that they're aware of, because whenever people do that, they talk about things like their passion for the animal, and it helps them appreciate them more. And don't worry, because they've been doing this for like 3 or 4 years now, and they know really what they're doing. And all those people are like 22 years old or less. You don't see anybody doing that. I'm 41. There's nobody that's 41 that's doing it, unless they just started doing that. Okay, there is an inevitable end to that. Whether that, it's usually not that person dying, okay, but it's very expensive and very painful to learn that very optional lesson. So no, I don't agree with it. A lot of it's easy to laugh at, but more or less, you just want people to be safe, right? So it's not about telling people what they can and can't do. But if I were somebody that, if I was a firearms instructor, or was somebody that worked with firearms professionally, and there was a group of people on Instagram who their whole being seemed to be getting attention by pointing loaded guns at their head, which is the same thing, really. They haven't shot themselves yet, but maybe gets some attention. As somebody that handles that professionally, and somebody that anybody that would be a firearms enthusiast then that wants to protect that hobby and that interest and that person, should give them some help for that, should try to prevent that, right? If you did that same kind of stupid crap on a firing range, you'd be amazed how fast you are kicked out of there forever. So there's a lot of similarities there. That's why I use that metaphor a lot. So the other thing is, why are those rattlesnakes not rattling at people? Are they not scared? They are terrified. Rattling is not always the only response. Sometimes they deal more with kind of the stressor at hand, being that they're captured. There's probably could be some pain involved with that, or it could be just a snake that's not tending to rattle. I handle a lot of rattlesnakes by putting them into tubes so I can measure them and give them injections of pit tags and that kind of thing. And some of them rattle, some of them don't. Some of them rattle until I pick them up and then they stop. Sometimes it's just kind of an easygoing snake. But in those cases, all of those snakes are experiencing stress. And I would be very surprised if snakes that are being picked up by the head needlessly, especially, which is most of those cases, that they are not experiencing a higher level of stress than ones that are not. So yeah, not necessary. And if those snakes are scared, they're probably just stressed out. Okay, so another one on Zoom is, have I ever encountered, either in the wild or otherwise, a rattleless rattlesnake? Yeah, lots of times. Rattles break off in the wild. It's made of the same stuff as your fingernails. So it gets brittle in the sun, it gets wet, heats, cools, shrinks, gets brittle, falls off. So very often rattlesnakes have just one segment called the proximal rattle, and when it shakes, there's nothing to rattle it against, so it doesn't make any sound. We have had rattlesnakes that are born with defects, so that every time a new shed happens, it just kind of sloughs off and it never catches it, so it never actually forms a rattle. Ridge-nosed rattlesnakes do that naturally until a few years of age. Some of them are injured, so there's a lot of different circumstances why rattlesnakes might not have a rattle. And something that people don't understand a lot of times is, well, why would you release that then? You're releasing an incredibly dangerous snake into those areas. I don't agree with that. That snake is not able to defend or notify people like other snakes would. However, baby rattlesnakes that are newborn, they're born with a rattle segment, but they also can't rattle for a while. That's not why people are bitten by them. It's for other reasons, because they tend to show up in a lot of places. And that tends not to be the case. So even though that might seem to make sense, that releasing a rattlesnake that doesn't have a rattle on it might be creating a danger, there is no evidence that actually suggests that. There's no data that shows that people are bitten by rattleless rattlesnakes at a higher rate than snakes that have rattles. In fact, maybe even the opposite, because there's that trend of if a rattlesnake rattles, it notifies people to its presence, which kicks off a whole snowball of stupidity in a lot of people that ends up getting them bitten. So, it happens a lot. It's not that uncommon. And a lot of times a rattlesnake that doesn't have a rattle will grow one back later. Okay, another one that someone was asked earlier from Mick. On average, how long does it take to realize a new development isn't where they wish to be? So rattlesnakes that are found at homes, very often, they don't want to be there. That's just where they know. Okay, so once a new development happens, they don't just kind of take off out into the desert to go try to find a new home. A lot of times they can't, because they're limited by things like the type of habitat that they need. A speckled rattlesnake that has a house built on the rock pile it's lived on forever doesn't have an opportunity to go crawl across the city to go to another mountain. So they make do with what they can. A lot of times it's kind of the opposite too. Neighborhoods can provide resources for rattlesnakes that weren't always there in abundance. One of those being water, shelter, and food, right? Those are the three major components of why rattlesnakes might show up in someone's yard intentionally. So if you have, it's June and you're watering your lawn every night, then you have something that a rattlesnake likes. It's nice and cool, and they can get a drink while they're there. And there's probably rodents that are coming in to drink water there for the same reasons, and they can sit there and hunt them. So in a lot of cases, having a neighborhood plop down next to your area isn't such a bad thing for a rattlesnake from their perspective, until the inevitable, they get hit by a car or chopped up with a shovel or something like that. So the snakes don't necessarily, they realize it when the bulldozer starts moving them around. And if they survive that, then there's a period of readjustment that lasts about 3 years or so before they kind of settle out to where they're going to be. But from there, it gets pretty complicated. What happens to them? Another one from earlier, do snakes come back to the same area if not relocated further away? So that's kind of in addition to that first question about, how successful is relocation. What we are trying to do is not take the snake outside of its known home range and move it into another home range entirely. I would love to be able to do that if we could do it safely, but it just doesn't. The evidence just isn't there yet to give us comfort in doing that. We tried to remove them, in our training as relocators internally. The short pitch on an answer on where exactly we put them is to the nearest seasonally appropriate habitat where they're going to survive, where they're not going to come into conflict with that same person, and minimize conflict with people in the future. Okay, so that means a lot of things. Sometimes that's further away than others. So what we try to do is catch the snake, move it somewhere else within its perceived home range, and then speak to the homeowner about why that snake was there to begin with. So we're not moving it to a different home range. We're trying to modify its home range. So let's say a snake is caught under somebody's patio, okay, because there's access under there and there's some rodents under there. Catch that snake. It's a very stressful experience, that snake, from evidence of how snakes respond to stress and repeated handling and their cryptic behavior after repeated stressful events. It knows that that's a bad thing that can happen there. But how, if they have hunting success there, or if it's a place that they really like, they'll try to come back to it. Unless they are given an alternative. So if we catch a snake and we know that it is there because it has a nice, cool place to live, to beat the heat, and it's trying to estivate, we will look for another place, what we think is the opposite side of its own home range, and give it an opportunity to do the same, into a pack rat nest or a cave or something like that. And then we'll also talk with the homeowner and say, hey, this snake was here. The only reason it was here is because you have this gap under your patio. If you seal that up, you won't have any snakes there. So then that snake, its home range is modified. So even if it does return, which in our work, we don't have evidence to say that it happens very often, there's nothing there for it anymore. We've modified its habitat, and it will often use that new location that we've given it to. So short distances matter. And whether a snake comes back to the general area of capture is not relevant to us, because 20 feet at most of these homes is the difference between being on your patio, sleeping on your slippers, and being on the other side of the fence, hiding in a pack rat nest. And that's kind of why we look at that as success, is if we take a snake and move it somewhere else, and then those people never see that snake again, and that snake survives, that's success. If you take it too far away and are not very specific with how you're releasing it and paying attention to that, then yeah, it'll probably try to come back. And you would too. If someone picked you up right now, you're sitting somewhere comfortably. If an alien picked you up wherever you're sitting right now and just dropped you off in downtown Phoenix, you would try to come home, right? That's the first thing you would do. But if that alien picked you up in the middle and dropped you off at like an amazing resort with a nice swimming pool and a loaded bar and there's food there, you might take a little longer before you try to come back, or you might stay there and say, you know what, my house is all right, but this is pretty good too. I guess this is where I'm going to hang out from now on. So it's a lot like that. You have to know what snakes like. Okay, another one from chat. How large is their home range? It really depends on many things. So I'll give you a gamut. Okay, there are some snakes that live their entire lives in a very small space, within a quarter mile or so, just because they have everything they need there. They live in prairie dog burrows, essentially. They have prey that's there. They den in place in those places. They don't really need to move around. Likewise, some other specialists like speckled rattlesnakes and tiger rattlesnakes in some cases might live their entire lives between a rock outcrop and the wash that's right below it. Sometimes they might go up and down the wash a little bit, but they don't go anywhere else. But like a big diamondback might travel for miles. A timber rattlesnake that I know about, went 6 miles in one direction. It was a female and was pregnant when it did that. Sidewinders are known for traveling quite a bit and moving around and being somewhat nomadic. So it really depends on the circumstances. So more or less, if you can fit all of the features that a snake needs to live throughout its life cycle and load it with prey and water and those resources, if all those things exist in a compact area, then a rattlesnake may live in that compact area. If they tend to be spread out and there's a lot of competition and they need to move around, or those things are fewer, like if you live in a colder environment and the exact hole that a snake can survive in, there's only one of them per 10 square miles, then they're going to move a lot more. So yeah, it can be miles and miles, or it can be 100 yards. So Scott is asking in the Q&A, are the western diamondbacks, Mojave, blacktail, and all similar species with a different morph? So the idea of a morph, that's something it's kind of, if you have a ball python, you might have different colors of it. They're all the same species, similar to how, a Chihuahua and a Doberman are both dogs. They're both the same species, but over a very long time, selective breeding has made all kinds of weird shapes out of them. Rattlesnakes, like the ones you mentioned, a western diamondback, and a Mojave, and a blacktail, and all the other ones here, they are not morphs. They are distinct, separate species with their own evolutionary trajectory and their own unique morphological gamut between them. So it's a very different thing. And sometimes they might hybridize. but it's not a very common thing. You know, it happens from time to time, but it's not really, you know, there are intergrade zones and there's some interesting things there, but they're separate, and they're separate for a lot of reasons. Another one from the Q&A on Zoom is, do rattlesnakes climb trees? I was under the impression that they are predominantly terrestrial. So you're correct. Rattlesnakes mostly are made for a life on the ground to wait. However, they do climb trees, and some of them do it pretty well. Rattlesnakes are not great climbers, though. So up, you know, climbing straight up a block wall like a slug, they can't do that. Their bellies are not sticky. They can't grip it. They're heavy bodied. But like a rough barked oak tree, yeah, they can get up there, and they do, and they go hunt up there. Something I see a lot more are speckled and tiger rattlesnakes and diamondbacks using low bushes, not only to hunt in, but also as an air conditioner. They can sit up there and stay off the hot ground a little bit. So it's really common. There are videos on our Facebook page too. If you look, there's an article on there that talks about rattlesnakes in trees, shows some photographs of them climbing trees. There was one that came out this year. That's kind of why we put that together, where somebody saw a rattlesnake way up in a tree, and you know, people were saying it was a hoax and a lot of things. No, that snakes do that. They will climb up there. They're not exceptional at it for the most part, but rattlesnakes can and do climb. You know, and things like our snake fencing that we have, that behavior is very accommodated for in there, is that rattlesnakes can climb if they have adequate footholds, for lack of a better term, to get up there. So we just deny them that, and they can't climb. Okay, another one from earlier. Would I ever consider taking a viewer and experience a live capture and release? We've done that a couple of times, but usually it's very specific things. Usually it's the media or something like that. We're unable to do that. We're never able to do that for the capture part. The reason for that is we are going to somebody's house, and we don't share their location or anything like that with anybody. Also, we have other things like insurance and other things. So if we have somebody that's stepping foot on somebody else's property, you know, so if you call somebody to capture a snake at your house and that person is bit on your property, they can sue you. So we have workers' comp and other things that protect the homeowner on that as well. So we can't just kind of take a person unless they also have their own insurance and other things. So there's lots of reasons why we can't do that. There are some circumstances we can take a person on a release of a rattlesnake. Generally, it's not just because they want to come along. You know, unfortunately, we have learned the hard way, as a lot of other people that have worked with these animals, that the you know, I wish we could trust people 100%. So the safest thing is just that we just don't do that. But it doesn't mean that we can't, you know, show you a rattlesnake at some point if it's something that you're very interested in. It's just not something we have a large capacity for. So yeah, email me. You know, maybe we can figure something out. Another one from earlier, David's asking, what do you look for when selecting a new employee for the business? It's different than what a lot of people think. Most of our best people come to us without any or with very little experience handling rattlesnakes. What we look for, what I've learned to look for, and early on, I didn't do that. Someone would try to want to work with us, and I would ask them questions like, you know, what's your rattlesnake handling experience? Have you moved a lot of them? And worry about the rest later. And what I ended up with were a lot of people that put themselves in danger needlessly, and then also stole from me and stole from the business, or generally were bad with customers, or, you know, had, you know, people you wouldn't want around your customers, right? So it's easy, I've learned, to teach people how to catch a rattlesnake safely and relocate them effectively and do all those things. If they are an intelligent person that is eager to learn and honestly does have the best intentions for the animal and people in mind, that's easy stuff to learn. What you can't teach a person is how to not steal from you, how to not lie, how to have integrity, how to you know, be curious and helpful, and the other types of just to appear professional. And that's what I look for the most part. Is this somebody that looks like they're, just like anything else? Are you a hard worker? Do you know how to learn, and do you have a natural tendency to learn, and do you know how to talk to people? So a good example of this is one of our guys. His name is Manny. He's in the West Valley. When we first started talking, I didn't really have any experience with rattlesnakes. He's an amazing person to have come to your house and catch a rattlesnake. And it's not because he is tremendously experienced with rattlesnakes. It's because he takes the time to make sure to handle that as thoroughly and honestly as you possibly can. So that's what I look for. And also, if you have somebody that's really, someone comes to me and says, I have 20 years of rattlesnake handling experience, what I hear is that you have 20 years of bad habits that I need to unteach you. And also that you're most likely going to give me grief about things like wearing safety gear, using tongs, not picking up snake by the head, doing other things they might do in your personal life. I don't need any of that around here. So yeah, experience with rattlesnakes are not required. Spelling words correctly and appearing as a professional, that's kind of what I look for. Another one from the Q&A on Zoom. Is the general public allowed to come to your facility for a tour? It is not that way. A lot of that is just because, if you go to the zoo, there's the front-facing thing that you can see all the animals there. And then behind the scenes, there's the area with the snake poop and the, other stuff going on there. Our building does not have a public display area, so all that stuff is going on. Also, for the time being, there's insurance and liability considerations and all those silly things that we can't ignore those things. Those are things that we have to pay attention to. So in the future, I would love that to happen, but at the moment, we don't have any way to do that. Another one from the Q&A. Tom is asking, last night I had a Western Diamondback removed from my pool. I observed him swimming with the bulk of his body well underwater and his head barely above the water. He seemed to be struggling until he reached the pool cover. Very different than water snakes that seem to glide on top of the water. Was he at risk of drowning? So first, rattlesnakes can swim pretty well. What happens in a pool a lot of times, and I don't know, Tom, if this is what happened in your circumstance or not, but what I've seen with snakes in pools is that by the time that they are discovered, in those circumstances, they may have been swimming for a while already, meaning they're exhausted. And no, they're not going to swim as well as a water snake. A water snake, or snakes that are specialized towards water, have some features in their body that help them glide across the water a little bit better than a rattlesnake. But rattlesnakes do swim pretty well, and they do it quite a bit. Sidewinders float too. I don't know why. I would assume that sidewinders float because they live in floodplains and they tend to, maybe they need that. It might be, maybe once if you live in the bottom of the Hassayampa River, maybe floating is a good survival strategy for you. But I found sidewinders just coiled sitting in the middle of a pool floating before. So they can swim. I would assume yours was exhausted. However, so another one from Facebook earlier. What do you look? Well, I just answered that. Let me see. Veronica is asking, I was on South Mountain last year, and there was a guy with a staff with his wife approached her and said that they were killing all the rattlesnakes they could find. And I told him that was illegal in the preserve. And do I have a recommendation on how to respond on what to say to those people? So that is hard because I've been doing this a very long time, and I talk with people all day about rattlesnakes, and I am just barely getting to where I feel like I might have a little bit of grip on an appropriate response. And my path of learning that, as I described a little bit earlier, is that if you go for the things that you think you need to tell those people, like that it's illegal, that snakes are an important part of the ecosystem, that snakes are important. Those things are not going to change those people's minds, because the reasons that they are killing those snakes have nothing to do with snakes. They're not, in almost all cases, killing those snakes because they honestly believe that they are doing something virtuous or protecting people. Even if they say that's what they are doing, the feeling that they're getting and doing that has much more to do with personal identity and culture than it does the snakes. So if that person that you met at South Mountain is going through there and just exterminating as many snakes as they can find, it might be because they get a good story out of it. It might be because that's basically a vehicle for that person to let the world know how brave they are, or interesting they are, or that's an interesting, they have some good stories from it, or they grew up in a place like Texas or Florida, or really anywhere in the Southeast where just killing snakes as you see them is that's just what you do. It's just like putting pants on in the morning. It's just, you see a snake, you kill it. That's it. And you're not going to teach them any different because they've never thought any differently about it. That's just how you do things. So you have to address those situations in a way that can help provide an alternative for those people to facilitate that same response. I had a good reaction lately. Our Facebook page kind of came under fire in the last few weeks because a video went viral in the southeastern United States somewhere. So we were just getting flooded with tons and tons of people just, kill it, burn it, put gasoline on it, put dynamite, all that. And I'm really glad that happened while I was off in Mexico looking for snakes, because I had no cell phone reception and I was busy and I didn't want to deal with it. So I had days to sit and think about the right response and really think this through. And the best response that I had is one that's actually working for a lot of people right now. And I'm really thankful for it, which could be the start of how to address your question, is how do you deal with it if somebody's doing that, is to give them a reason to second guess the reasons why they're doing that. Good people don't crush animals with rocks. I bet that guy's a great guy. I bet he's a good guy. I bet that if he saw you pulled over on the side of the road with a flat tire and you looked like you needed help, he would help you. Right? People are not killing snakes because they're evil. They don't know any better, and the snakes become a way for them to basically express problems in our culture, in our identity. So think of it that way. If you see an opportunity to respond to somebody that's doing that in a way that makes it so they can seem interesting or brave or courageous or whatever that type of thing that they're trying to portray, without killing the snakes, in a lot of cases, keeping the snakes alive can facilitate that much better than killing them. Do that. And more blunt force than that, that's illegal. Call the cops. Tell them who was there. They're usually not going to do anything about that, unfortunately. But you can give it a shot. So yeah, it's a long topic, but I wish I had a better answer for you. Another one from the earlier questions. Jason's asking, I've never been bitten by a snake, but how long does it take for the venom for a rattlesnake to take effect? Actually, I think I answered that one earlier, so let's get it right away. If you're bitten by a snake, you'll know it. With the warmer temperatures, do you feel the snakes will be out longer? Maybe. We'll see what happens. This is the longest period of time in history in Arizona for temperatures over 100 degrees. It is the hottest summer that has ever been recorded. It is also the driest summer that's ever been recorded. We see significant changes in rattlesnake activity this year. One of those being delayed birthing of babies and birthing in places where they were estivating instead of traveling. That's going to have some effect on the snakes, on when they move. So like I was saying earlier, I think that where we're normally super busy right now, when right now we're only doing, we're doing fewer than 10 snake calls a day, I think we might get busy next week when things dip down a little bit. Snakes might be moving, and that might delay it. However, there are other things at play too, like the seasonal averages or length of days and other stuff that just happens every year that are not going to change dramatically. So yes, let's say that snakes do end up delaying their behavior by a little bit. It doesn't mean that it's going to be by a month. It might mean that it takes another week for them to get there. They're going to try to compensate for that. So yes, but a little bit. That's kind of the answer to that. All right, another one from Zoom. Used to say that snakes were poisonous, but recently I've corrected myself to indicate that they are venomous, not poisonous. You know the difference. So it truly does not matter. And I used to do that too. So venomous means that snakes are, venom is injected. It's an active delivery method. Poison is something you ingest. Like if you eat a poison apple, you're poisoned. If you're bitten by a mosquito is a venomous animal. English in the United States, we are the only ones to really differentiate between those two things. So yes, they do mean different things, but only relatively recently. And it really doesn't matter too much. So if you are working to educate somebody and you want to teach them about snakes, and they say, hey, which snake, is this a poisonous one? If you respond with, no, it's venomous, you have not answered their question. Because what they're actually asking is this snake a snake that can use a toxin to hurt me? So answer that question first, and then if there's time later and it seems appropriate and you're not going to turn them off by being overly semantic, then you can explain the differences between poison and venom. But for the most part, if somebody asks me if a snake is venomous, I don't even mention it. It really doesn't matter, And if you look at any publications out there or any books by just legends in herpetology from the past, anything before the 90s, you're going to see titles like Venom or Poisonous Snakes of America, and terminology that really kind of goes back and forth. And those people certainly know what they were talking about. So it's recent, doesn't matter. I wouldn't sweat it. Scott in the Q&A, I just wanted to thank you for what you do. Here's a lot of misinformation about reptiles, and appreciates our dedication. So thank you, Scott. I will not lie and say that when we get, flooded with comments with people that, just pictures of dead snakes, and when you kill them, that doesn't bother us over time, and probably, affects our mental health in the long run. But we do meet a lot of people too that do get what we're trying to do, and that do learn. And we do have a lot of people that started out with us hating snakes and wanting to kill them, that now do not feel that way. So, having any one of those people do that is enough to endure the next 1,000 dead snake pictures we get in our inbox. Okay, another one from Veronica from earlier. In one of our videos, we say that the mother stays with the young for a week or so, and then after that, the youngster leaves and has its own personality. I explained that a little earlier. Would you be willing to expand on that and give some details of your observations? Have I noticed females also having different personalities and perhaps even different mothering styles? So I can't talk about this with a great amount of detail because a lot of it is still just not known. I can paraphrase some research that's been done. If you look up social snakes, you can see a lot of that done with Arizona black rattlesnakes. There's also a lot of work done with prairie rattlesnakes and western diamondbacks on how long they care for their babies, that kind of thing. I can say that different species will treat those babies differently, and what the babies do afterwards may be different. So just warning you right here, you're entering the anecdote zone. These are observations that I have had that may or may not be backed up by publication, maybe because that information is just not known. Some rattlesnakes tend to stay closer to the den than others. So for instance, you go to certain areas and you see newborn sidewinders and Mojave rattlesnakes and diamondbacks just cruising around everywhere. They're everywhere. They're all over the place. And we certainly see that at homes where the snakes just seem to be all over the place. Once those snakes leave their mothers, they're gone. They go out and they move around, and they don't really have a really close association with the place that they were born. They may return to it. They may not. But you almost never see newborn black-tailed rattlesnakes or speckled rattlesnakes or tiger rattlesnakes. unless you are paying very close attention to where they are birthed. And in animals like that, those snakes will actually travel to close to where they're going to spend the winter, so they can give birth there, so that those babies probably don't have as much of a distance to crawl to get to where they're going to spend the winter. And then those babies don't go on these big wandering journeys. They may stay there until they're a little bit larger. So what happens after a baby rattlesnake leaves its mother is probably a lot more variable than the behavior of what happens when they are with the mothers. Of snakes that I have observed in the wild with baby rattlesnakes, speckled rattlesnakes, tiger rattlesnakes, a number of other ones around here, also banded rock rattlesnakes numerous times, and ridge-nosed rattlesnakes quite a few times too. They tend to have a little bit more of a tight-knit community there, and then some of the big males take off there too. So there's so much variability to it, and so much is yet to be known about that, especially the behavior around what happens with those babies and the mothers. It's really impossible to give any single answer. I do know also that in captivity, though, when we have babies that are born with the mothers, there's a high degree of variability there too. Some of them just kind of want to take off pretty fast, and some of them are more inclined to just kind of stay with their mom. So I wish I could be more specific, but it's just not possible at the moment. There's just so much to know. Jason's asking, how does the venom affect the human body? Lots of different ways, and it also depends on the venom. But for the most part, like a Western diamondback, that venom is going to be breaking down tissue. It's going to be affecting your blood, breaking down cells, and then all the goop that essentially is created that is going to cause another number of reactions too. So your blood pressure is going to fluctuate and have problems. It can affect you. You can have an allergic reaction to it. There really isn't a single consistent way of knowing what's going to happen to you if you're bitten by a rattlesnake. That is why also it is not necessarily important to know what rattlesnake bit you if you are bitten by a rattlesnake. Because, and again, I'm not a doctor. This is what I've seen doctors and venom specialists say. It's most important to watch what is happening and aggressively treat with antivenom based on that. There's not many people in the world that would be competent of knowing, for instance, the venom distribution of something as complex as a Mojave rattlesnake, which can have wildly different venom composition from one part of its range to another, and look at that and go, here's exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to start pre-treating for this and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a wide variety of things that's going to happen. But let's say, here's what I would expect to happen. If I was working in my snake building today and I was bitten by a Western diamondback, what I think would happen is that it would hurt intensely. And I'm pointing at my hand because that's where a lot of people are bitten. And if you're someone that works with snakes in a captive setting, that's where bites happen, is on your hand. Very optional place to be bitten, by the way. It would hurt intensely right away. There would be a little bit of blood that comes out, and then it would start to swell. And then I would, maybe 20 minutes later, start to feel some other effects. I might get dizzy. I might get some tingling in my lips. The dizziness might come from blood pressure dropping, and start feeling some of the systemic reactions. I might get nauseous. I might want to black out, things like that. And then depending on my reaction to the venom, it can go all different directions from there. So that's why it's so important to get to a hospital quickly and not wait and see what happens. Unfortunately, because I am around rattlesnakes and venom and their proteins so often, I might have a higher chance of having an allergic reaction to the venom, which can be much more dangerous. So each person is going to react differently to the bite, and each snake is going to be able to potentially deliver a different reaction as well. So if you're bitten by a rattlesnake, 911 immediately, go there, let the doctor do what he's got to do. Kim is asking, so all rattlesnake bites in Arizona treated with the same antivenom? Yes, until recently. So Crofab is an antivenom. It's called a polyvalent antivenom, meaning that it is made from multiple venomous snake species in the United States. I think there's 6 different ones, and includes Western diamondbacks and Mojave rattlesnakes, and also some other ones that aren't found here, like cottonmouths. It's made to address multiple things. And then there's also another one here called Anavipe. Actually, I've never said it, I don't think, out loud. It's Anavipe or Anavip. That is a new one that was just approved by the FDA, I think, 2 years ago. That's also available here as well, that I'm kind of excited about having some kind of option for that. And the differences between those, I can't speak to entirely well. But it is also one that would work for multiple species. So again, another reason why you don't need to, bring in stuff. I've had people tell me, and I see it on Facebook all the time when people are talking about something like the Mojave rattlesnake, which is a notorious rattlesnake and famous for, it's infamous for being this highly dangerous thing. And they say one of the reasons why it's so dangerous is that there's no known anti-venom for it. That's complete BS. The antivenom for a Mojave rattlesnake is the same antivenom for Western diamondback. Okay, Kathy is saying, I emailed a picture of a snake in my neighbor's garage about a year ago, and you identified it as a Western diamondback who had indeed lost her rattle. How can you tell it was a female? Or is it just a figure of speech? How do you tell a male or a female? So most likely, it wasn't a figure of speech. In general, if I'm talking about a rattlesnake and I don't know what sex it is, I will say it, just because I don't know. So if I say a snake is a he or a she, I'm being very specific with what I think it is. In general, rattlesnakes are pretty easy with a lot of experience to sight tell the sexes of them. Males tend to have longer tails from the cloaca down to the rattle, and the body is a more gradual taper that once it hits the cloaca, it either gets a little fatter or stays the same. A female tends to have a shorter tail that has a more abrupt taper after the cloaca with a more abrupt taper at the body. So a female's body is a wider body that tends to more quickly come to a point at the cloaca and then has a little tail afterwards. And then we do a lot of guessing and checking and probing to kind of be able to check our work, essentially, or check my work anyway, so I can have a skill that's developed there, being able to sight tell. But once you've seen a lot of rattlesnakes and had that calibration, it's pretty easy to tell the difference between them for the most part. I could be wrong about a lot of those too, but my experience and checking my work on that says that I'm usually right about it. Tom's asking, do I ever name snakes? I don't. And it's not to say that other people shouldn't. For me, the reason why I don't name our snakes or our venomous animals, I think it's a safety issue for me, and I tend to go a little bit overboard and obsessive on safety stuff, and that's what works for me, and that's what I think is going to keep me safe. And there's other people that do name their snakes, and that's just fine, because we all know our tendencies, right? So, like, let's say you have to get up to go on a flight, and you have to get up at 3:30 in the morning. And, do you ever set a second alarm clock because you know your own tendencies of sleeping through things? Well, me not naming snakes is the same way. Is that part of staying safe for me is to recognize my own tendencies and come up with procedures and plans that protects me against myself. So one of those I know is that if I have an animal and it's named, if it has a name, I will probably treat that animal differently than one that doesn't. So if I have a whole bunch of, if I have a Western diamondback and its name is Fluffy, I might not treat that animal in the same way as, Crotalus atrox, which will kill me if I let my guard down or stop paying attention to what I'm doing. So for me, not naming them is just an easy little mental trick to make sure I always know who I'm dealing with. I have a diamondback, I have a Mojave, I have different rattlesnakes, and also, unfortunately, most of our snakes we have for a very long time. We do have some that die occasionally. We had a gopher snake that I had for a very long time that died last year, and it's sad. But also, it helps not be too bummed about that stuff when it's an animal that we are trying to take our best care of, and not a pet. So our venomous snakes, the ones that I take care of, are absolutely not my pets. And that's why I don't name them. It helps me keep safe. Okay, that's all the ones in the QA there. Let's see if I have any more in the pre-selected ones. Mark is asking, when do I expect rattlesnakes to go into hibernation? Yeah, I answered that one already. About the second week of November or so. And I'm going to go into Facebook and see if there's anything else in here. There probably are. Yeah, we're still good on time. Let's see. Is it possible for the female rattlesnakes in the southern states to reproduce twice a year? It might be, but it doesn't really happen. And the reason for that is that it takes a lot of resources for that to occur. So snakes, let's say in a really warm area like Phoenix, Western Diamondbacks mate in the summer or in the spring and in the fall, right? So if they mate in the fall, they will retain the sperm and then become gravid in the spring and have their babies in July or August or so. If they mate in the spring, they will become gravid right away and have their babies in July or August or so. So there's a lot of things that not only have to do with the health and recovery period of the mother, who has to put out all of her resources and body fat and body condition into successfully having those babies, but also the survivability of the young. So in a captive setting, you might be able to perpetually, have the mother give birth and then get her pregnant again and keep doing that. I would assume that mother would not live exceedingly long, because that is very difficult for them to do. And in the wild, where they don't get a frozen thawed mouse on the regular, that would probably kill them pretty quick. So it's kind of the opposite, is that they might breed every year, but quite often they'll breed every other year, or in areas where it's a cooler environment, like timber rattlesnakes or ridge-nosed rattlesnakes or something like that. They might even do it every 3 years or more. So short answer is no on that. All right. And I think unless someone has another one, oh, there's a couple more. I'll do these 3 questions, and if another one shows up on Zoom, I'll answer it. And then I think I'll probably get out of here. I think we've talked about it a lot today. Christine's asking, do Grand Canyon rattlesnakes only live in the Grand Canyon? And if so, why? So not really. Grand Canyon rattlesnakes and what exactly they are is kind of up for debate right now. They could be a subspecies of Great Basin rattlesnakes that just kind of got stuck in the canyon. They could be their own entire thing that is trapped in the canyon based on niche boundaries, meaning, it's not just geographic boundaries that keep an animal in place sometimes. Sometimes it's competing with another animal that lives similar to it that is better at it. So if you're looking at it that way, then Grand Canyon rattlesnakes at the top of the canyon come into competition with Great Basin rattlesnakes or prairie rattlesnakes, and either integrate with them or lose out to them because of specialization. But in the Grand Canyon, there's also speckled rattlesnakes, black-tailed rattlesnakes in some areas. Great Basin rattlesnakes are going to go in there in some areas. It's also a very large drainage system that's also going to have prairie rattlesnakes in some places and midget-faded rattlesnakes, and then intergrades of all of those things. And Mojaves, and there's a lot going on there. So, the short answer to that is no. Grand Canyon rattlesnakes are not only found in the Grand Canyon. They are associated with tributaries of the Grand Canyon and the canyon itself, but there are lots of places that they can be found in a wider area than that. Being asked if we're going to be setting up the Reptile Expo this year. It's next month. We talked about it. We are not going to be at the Phoenix Reptile Expo this year because of COVID. We love to do education events and setting that up. However, it is not a core part of our operation. So I don't feel that it is helping anybody to take the risk to do that. Also, I wouldn't want to subject our employees to any unnecessary risk by being in an enclosed space and all that. But if if you're going to that, I would definitely encourage you to go to that. It's an awesome expo. I'm really bummed that we can't go. Awesome place. Kim's asking if all rattlesnakes are live bears. Yes, they are. All vipers in the New World, North America and South America, except for Bushmaster, are live bears. So yeah, all rattlesnakes definitely are. And the last question I'm going to answer is from Tyler. Can snakes come in through a doggy door? It's a kind of random question, but it's one that people ask. And it's a really good question, because if you live in a place where rattlesnakes live, you want to know, can they come through the doggy door? Can they get into your house? Yes, they can, but they almost never do. There's probably some reasons for that. One is that rattlesnakes just, for whatever reason, just don't like being inside homes. It might be because of the amount of stress involved for that there's people running around. It could be a lot of things, but we very rarely find rattlesnakes inside of homes in relation to how many we find outside of homes or other species of snakes that we find inside of homes. So if it was only a matter of access, we would see a similar number of baby diamondbacks inside a house as we do like a ground snake or a night snake, which we get inside the house most of the time when we get called out to them. There is a natural history and a behavior element to that as well, that for whatever reason, rattlesnakes don't like it. When we get a snake inside a house, it is typically because someone left the door open, or was left open for a while, or there's a big hole in the wall, or someone just moved into the house and the house was vacant for years and years before that, or the very rare occasional house that should be condemned for whatever reason. There's someone staying there or about to stay in there. So they can, but they don't. Is a short answer to that. What I would suggest to anybody that is worried about rattlesnakes coming in the doggy door and the health of the dog itself too, is to focus all effort on the outside of the house. The best way to keep a rattlesnake possibility from being inside your house is to focus on features, landscaping, opportunities, access, all that stuff on the outside of the house. Meaning that fewer rattlesnakes that are visiting the outside of your house mean a lesser chance of one finding its way inside. How exactly to keep rattlesnakes away from your property? I'll talk about that here just for a minute, because I have the time to do it. For anyone who wants to stick around and hear it, is more or less just to look at the resources that are available to them and try to deny them that. So if you have dog food outside that you're keeping there, if you have lots of rodents, if you have lots of places to hide, if you have a dripping hose, sprinklers that go off, water opportunities, a pool, a bird bath, anything that animals can use, rattlesnakes are going to use those things. Okay, so by eliminating those things or reducing them as much as possible, you can greatly decrease the amount of rattlesnakes that would find your yard useful, or have them at least choose the place that's just outside the property. That also means, there's some give and take to that. You don't want to have your yard look like the surface of Mars, okay? I mean, there's no rattlesnakes on the surface of Mars, right? So maybe there's something to it, but you can have some appropriate level there. So I would say, look at things critically. If there's a bush in your front yard that you're not in love with and you've I don't know if I want that, just get rid of it, because then it's not a resource. Avoid certain plants that have a lot of shade and water opportunities, like lantana or rosemary are big offenders, which is kind of funny because a lot of people plant rosemary in their yard under the false belief that it keeps rattlesnakes away. It doesn't. It attracts them, because those types of bushes, those really leafy bushes, they tend to be overwatered and under-maintained. So they usually have a big section of leaf litter under it that's wet and rotting, which provides warmth in the winter and opportunities to stay cool in the summer. So get rid of that kind of stuff if you're on the fence about it. So, every person that lives where rattlesnakes do could benefit from taking one Saturday out of the year and walking around the house and trying to eliminate those features. Picking up and getting rid of the old roofing tiles on the side of the house that you're not going to use. Getting rid of the deflated pool toys that sit back buy the pool filter that you know you're never going to use. You know, the wood pile that you think you're going to get into every year but never really do. You know, get rid of it. Clean up the yard. We all have it. I certainly do. On the side of our house right now are like 3 lawnmowers I got to get rid of. You know, if I lived in a place where there were rattlesnakes, I would get rid of them. Actually, with any luck, I'm moving to a place that has a lot of rattlesnakes around it in a month or two. And yeah, I love seeing rattlesnakes around, but places like by my patio door, yeah, I'm going to be paying attention to the shade opportunities that are there. So that's the best thing you can do in those cases. And then if there's something that you know, if you just want to be sure, there are physical barriers. We do snake fencing. There's lots of people that do that kind of thing just to make it so that they just can't get into an area. And then also pay attention to your dogs. So there's a company that we recommend called Rattlesnake Ready. They have a website, just rattlesnakeready.com. They do an exceptional job of teaching your dogs to avoid rattlesnakes. So, you know, if you're around rattlesnakes, killing them is not the way to keep you safe. That has nothing to do with the fact that I like rattlesnakes. It's just true that if you kill rattlesnakes as they appear, you are just putting yourself repeatedly into the zone where you can be bitten by them. And the thought on how to stop the future event tends to kind of stop there. When you kill a rattlesnake, you are doing nothing to prevent the next rattlesnake that comes to your property. I hear very often from people that say things that are very funny. If you think about it, they'll say like, well, I kill every rattlesnake I see. I've killed 20 rattlesnakes on my property every year for the last 20 years, and it seems to be working great for me. Well, clearly it's not. Clearly that plan is not preventing you from seeing other rattlesnakes. So focus more on the procedural thought on keeping rattlesnakes from finding your property useful or accessing your property, and don't worry so much about the emotional response that you might feel about killing a snake does to feel like you've handled the job. You know, the snake is a symptom of the problem, not the other way around. A rattlesnake in your property or, you know, around your dogs or anything, that is there because of a problem. And that's what you want to focus on. And if you can do that effectively, then you won't see any rattlesnakes. So that is mostly what we talk about in our work, is trying to keep people safe from snakes, and in turn keep snakes safe from people. Those things go hand in hand without they don't need to take a priority over one another. There's no dichotomy there that you have to worry about. It just turns out that the best way to keep safe around snakes is to learn about them and pay attention. So on that note, I will end this. And hopefully you learned some stuff. You know, there's a lot. These are always different, you know, in October than it is in spring, when people are just running into their first rattlesnakes for the year and kind of freaking out about it. But you know, I think we might do another one of these later. But I think winter is coming and the snakes are going to go get a rest, and I think I'm going to join them. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going to post this video someplace, probably YouTube, so that you can see it later. And if you have any questions that you want to have answered, you can still post them in the Facebook link. You can email us at info@rattlesnakesolutions.com, and I'll answer there as well. All right. Thank you. See you later.